Thank you, Pastor Mark, for this nice welcome this morning. Good morning. I just wanted to continue where I ended yesterday and see how I can compact so much in so short a time so that we can really share the burden of transforming and discipling our nations. You know, that is our call, that is our assignment from God, and we have to look to God to see how do we disciple America, what is his strategy, because he has a strategy for every nation. But there are principles which don't change. Every nation may require a different strategy according to the cultural context, but there are principles that they cut across. So what I'm really sharing are those principles that really cut across, leaving out specific strategies that may be different from your culture, from your perspective, and that is what I want to spend a little bit more time now on. Yesterday, I ended with looking at the way the church, I gave examples, the church in Nigeria, for example, how the Muslims have a strategy to take over not only Nigeria, but the whole of Africa. The Abuja Declaration has a plan to take over all of Africa. The whole of North Africa is almost Muslim, all of it. Sub-Saharan, we have Christianity thriving now, but they have a plan to take it over. They have a plan to make sure all our nations become Muslim. When Idi Amin became president of Uganda, only 7 years he had in power, you would think that the whole of Uganda is Muslim. It took most of the key lands and most effective positions in his government, of course, was all Muslims. A few Christians here and there, but they had no power. He took the most prime land in the capital city, gave it to Muslims. We have the biggest mosque in Africa, built by Gaddafi. When Amin was in power, he was sponsored by Gaddafi. And so you can imagine that in a very, very short time, he closed all our churches. We could not pray. We went underground. Christians were more than 85%. They were about 90. Muslims were only about 10% because of money and what they kept, converting so many young people. You see, for them, that is how they are. Once they are in power, they are not apologetic. They are not even courteous. They are not even civil. They will say, no more prayer, no more church. There are places in England, as I shared yesterday, where you cannot even go as a Christian. So you can imagine a Christian nation like England. No-go areas for Christians, only for Muslims. And they are getting more and more and more and more and more every single day. They have taken over cities. They are now, once they become mayors, then they entrench there. And to remove them from that position becomes a big problem because one Muslim leaves, another one follows. That is their strategy. Once you're a mayor, as a Muslim, the next one will be, and the next one. So they have a whole line so that they take one area at a time, they consolidate their power, and they continue to do that. Christians don't. They don't have time for all those things. They don't have time to strategize. In Uganda, whenever we have elections, every mosque prayer, their prayers are very short. After the prayers, the next time is strategizing. How many candidates do we have on the council, and the land board, in the school board? They always have those meetings after the what? The mosque. And for us, it's been interesting that, we have election from the village level to the parish level to the sub-county level. But on each of those electable offices, they have 3-4 candidates. 4 candidates when the Christians are not even there. There are places where you can't even find a Christian. They have 3-4 Muslims, Hajjat so-and-so, Hajj so-and-so. So you have to choose from the better devil to elect. So you have no option other than electing them. So this is what it is like. For us Christians, we seem to be so busy. And what I emphasized yesterday is the freedom that you have, which you have actually exported all over the world. You have exported this freedom We are beneficiaries of that freedom. I always repeat that if it wasn't for United States of America, all of Africa would be communist. If it wasn't for America, most of Africa would be Muslims. But now they knew you can do it well there. Now they came here. After you hear the liberal agenda, the gay agenda, the Muslims are right here now, wanting to take your nation piece by piece, piecemeal. They are very good at that. And I want to to share briefly the key principle of transformation, steps to influence public policy. This is what most Christians don't consider as important, yet the public policy is very, very important. And through the history, you'll find that you always have to start with theology. That's what God has done in the revivals, Great Awakening 1, Great Awakening 2, in the Reformation. You always start with the right theology. When you have the right theology, then philosophy of life follows. Out of that, you have the political and the economic ideology. Then out of that, you have the public policy and laws that follow. These 4 steps cut across. If the theology is wrong, most likely the philosophy that will flow will be wrong. And I've put some things down here. Look at it this way. If you go to a Muslim country, their theology is about Islam. They believe in the Islamic Caliphate. I'll mention it sometime later on. But what comes out of that, their theology and their religion, informs their philosophy of life. If their religion teaches that women are subservient to men, women can't drive, you know what is in Saudi Arabia and all those things. That is their theology. Out of that will flow the philosophy of life. Male dominance, for example, and many other things. If you take deism or atheism, you'll find that they believe in materialism. The philosophy of life will be materialism. So the theology always comes first. What you teach, how you explain that teaching is so important. I'm using that as an example because your nation was founded on a very, very strong biblical foundation, which have resulted into a great nation. The theology was right until 150 years ago. That theology built the DNA of a great nation. That theology that they believed that we should be in every sphere. They believed that the kingdom of God should be manifested in education, in agriculture, in politics, in every sphere. That was their theory. That's what informed their philosophy of life. 108 leading institutions of America were started by Christians, Harvard being the first one. John Harvard in 1636, a Christian who gave his whole library to start at that time an institution where people would be taught the gospel and take it. That's how it started. That's what John Harvard had in mind. A young man, he wasn't very old. And Lwere, later in 1701. But all of them, the theology that informed all that was the theology that we should take the light of God into the whole community. We should start with education because education is important. Why? Because God wants all men to be saved. That's number one. Number two, all men should come to the knowledge of the truth. Because all men should come to the knowledge of the truth, we should take education and send out the truth. That is the theology, which informed the philosophy. Out of which philosophy then you get the political ideology, the economic ideology. So if the theology is wrong, you'll end up with wrong philosophy, wrong political ideology and economic ideology, and then the policies and laws that come out of that will flow accordingly. That's the emphasis I'm making in this session, to see how important that we revise our theology. In most of our churches, the emphasis is about me. The emphasis is about you being blessed, you being saved, which is not wrong, it's right, but we've ended short of what God intended. The gospel is intended to change the whole person, the whole family, the whole society, the city, and the nations. The theology is the key. The theology that the evangelical church has at the moment does not give allowance for discipling a nation. That's why we should start at the theology. Because at the moment, our theology is all about me, my salvation, my healing, my prosperity. That's where we end most of the time. In such a theology, you have no provision to impact communities. You don't mind when people are suffering or going down, they're going to hell. The majority of the people, of course, we go and save the individuals, but we have no theology for saving a city. We have no template for saving a nation. No template in the church. A typical Christian doesn't even think about those kind of things. They only mind if it's going to affect their children. When you say, oh, the state is doing this to my children, then they are more concerned. If it doesn't come to me, then I'm not. I have no time for those things as long as I'm healed, as long as I'm blessed, as long as I prosper. So the emphasis, therefore, is to first go back to our theology. Do you agree on that? Amen. Yes, our theology is the issue. And I've put these lines here for I've done a lot of study on this particular topic because I've felt that, you know, we are responsible as priests to teach. And I found that when I sit with lawyers and judges and doctors in our country, I call them. And when I call them, I sit with them, and I don't use a lot of verses in the Bible. I may quote one or two. But when you reach them from a purely pragmatic and you reason with them, they start to see sense. They start to say, what you're saying is right. Think what you're saying, even when they're not Christians. Because many of them mean good, except those who are in this evil agenda. There are many people who are not really, they're not religious as such, but they are objective. They would love a good country. They feel bad about corruption. They feel bad when they see the corruption that it can. So when you start to reach them out and you start to bring this truth, they're ready to support what you are doing. And we have that in our country. And I think even here, you have the majority of the people in America are good people. They're good, they want good. But because the liberal agenda has taken advantage of our quietness, of our isolationism, or, you know, where we've reduced everything to just church. Christianity has been reduced to church services. So majority of the people don't have, and I'm going to look at, the second part I'm going to look at is the way this agenda goes out from inside the church to the public, the way we sell it. So theology comes first, philosophy next, then the political ideology for Muslims is this. They believe that one day a universal caliphate will rule the whole world. I don't know whether you're aware of that. The way we believe about Christ, that he will rule the whole world, they also have the universal caliphate, whom they believe after Islam, the jihad has succeeded, the whole world will be under that caliphate. That's their belief. That's why they are doing the jihad. So their belief is that one day they will rule over the whole world. And they are persistent, they are patient, they are perseverant, they are enduring, because one day they know this will come. Now, the ISIS, look at the ISIS, for example, the ISIS group. The ISIS group, in 2014, I think, 2014 or 4, they came out to say, you know, our small countries are splintered, the Arab nations, because one day our lands were taken over. I'm sure you know some of this history. Let me just summarize it. The Ottoman Empire ruled the whole of the Middle East until the First World War in 1917, when it was defeated. And all these Arab nations were under the Ottoman Empire. The Muslims at that time believed this was their caliphate. It had been started earlier on in 1299, and they had been working on invading and taking over the whole world. In the first 100 years after the death of Muhammad, they took over the whole of North Africa. Then they continued on to Spain. Then they continued to take over France, and Charles Martel stopped them in 732. That advance was stopped. So later on, they gradually lost Spain, but that was the now the Ottoman Empire starts, and they think, okay, now our caliphate is going to come up. Our vision is coming true. So the Muslims in 1459, something around there, they defeated the biggest Christian empire. The Constantinople fell to them. They said, Byzantine Empire. That's the name I was looking for. So they defeated the Byzantine Empire, and they blocked that whole side. They said, now we are coming west. We are now going to take over. And with that, they continued to advance into Europe, believing one day they are going to have a caliphate who will rule the whole world. And then at a certain time, they were stopped in Vienna. In Vienna, was it 1429, when they were on the September 29th, the September 11th, when they wanted to take over Vienna, the Polish came in, supported the Australian, they defeated their advance. That is, you see, that is the vision that Osama bin Laden used. He said, our advance was stopped in Vienna on September 11th. Now, so his attack on the Twin Towers is, so you see how their thinking is? They are still pursuing the same vision. They have never lost it. So now when you move from that, you get to the ISIS. So the ISIS is following the same vision that one day we're going to have a caliphate. It was, let me go back to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire falls in November in 1917, but the British and the French, they sent two men. One is Pico, another one is Psychic. Psychic is the Englishman, George Psychic, and another one, the Pico of French. They went in stealthily in 1916, and anticipating the fall of the Ottoman Empire, they said, let's go in and start to divide that whole land amongst ourselves, the British and the French. So they went in quietly, and they said, okay, you'll take Iraq, you'll take Syria. Russia was on their side, so Russia would take Turkey, Britain would take this, and France would take. So the whole of the Middle East was divided up by that Pico-Psychic agreement. I'm sure you've heard of Pico-Psychic agreement. That agreement was done secretly by the British and the French. And so after its fall in November 1917, they divided up those countries. So when the Russians, the Soviets fell under the communists did not take over Turkey. But Britain and France took over the rest. So in other words, Turkey remained there without the influence of the Western. So the guy who came up, I've forgotten his name, in 1924, said, I don't want a religious nation, I want a secular nation. Ataturk, that's it. They called him the father of their nation, Ataturk, in 1924. So he said, no, want Turkey a secular nation. The Muslims were so annoyed. So they did not continue to pursue the caliphate because of Ataturk. While the other nations fell under the British and the French. Now, during that time, of course, we see that the caliphate vision has now died. So the British later on discovered oil, and they got a lot of interest in the Middle East. And then after that period, the ISIS comes up and says, we want to bring back the vision of the caliphate. That guy, what was he called? Baghdad something. He said in 2015, he says, 90 years, we lost our vision. We want to bring it back because this vision of splintered nations is a Western thing. It's not ours. We want a caliphate. We want to pursue our vision of taking over the world. We want to pursue it. Now we will have that. We'll find this issue of nations is a biblical concept. It's a Judeo-Christian concept. That's how they call it. A Judeo-Christian concept. It's not our concept. Our concept is a caliphate. Now, when you look at the Bible, empire is a pagan idea. Nation is the biblical idea. God destroys a nation, an empire in Genesis 11. This empire is what Nimrod was building. He was building an empire to rule over the people and to stop what God had wanted. God made sure that empire does not succeed, and he makes sure he gives the nations their language. There are 3 words there in the 10th chapter which describe a nation: language, a territory, and a culture, a people who have right to live as them. Those 3 definitions of a nation is what God has always wanted. Abraham wants to make you into a what? A nation. Yeah? You have your own culture, you are independent, you have a territory. That is what God has always wanted. Nations. Satan wants empires. In an empire, you are subject. You pay taxes, but you have no right of how those taxes are used. They can be used for the statue of the queen or king. That's what the 13 colonies in America objected to. No taxation without what? Representation. So that's how your revolution was. Because your founding fathers had the biblical concept. The biblical concept is the nation. In a nation, you're a citizen. In a nation, you have rights. In a nation, you have privileges. In a nation, you have opportunities. But you also have duties, responsibilities, and obligations. That's what God has been building through the ages. In one of the sessions, if we have time, I'll cover a bit of that. God has been working the same way he has been working to restore his church through the ages. He has also been working to restore one of these major concepts, is a nation. It will be one of the major confrontations that will happen in our age. Bringing back the issue of nation at the center stage has been part of God's working, because that is his idea. So he destroys the empire in Genesis 11 in order to bring the what? To release the nations. And so the ISIS says, we should have had our caliphate. Look at this small Israel. Israel is very, very small. Eh? And the Arab nations have what population are they? About 14, I can't forget. Israel is about 14 million total, but in Israel there are only about 8 million. They say, how can this small nation defeat all of us? So their explanation is because when the British defeated the British and French defeated the Ottoman Empire, they splintered our nations. How can a small nation defeat? There have been 13 wars, 3 major wars, 13 other confrontations, and in all of these, Israel had defeated them. So why could we be defeated by this small nation? It's because of the Pico-psychic agreement which dismantled our empire, our caliphate empire. That's why we are weakened. So we must work to get back to what we are. That was the whole vision of ISIS. This whole vision of ISIS is religious. It's not political. It's religious. It's the religion which informs the philosophy, which also determines the political ideology. Political ideology flows from the theology. And that is something that the church has to really, really get back to. So all these wars in the Middle East are really the theology, the religious beliefs, the religious convictions are the ones that are behind all that. But so they say we needed to destroy the Pico-psychic agreement. Now, where does that begin? In the 1648, in Europe, there was a war that took 30 years. It started in 1618 to 1648. In that war, it's called the 30 Years' War. Christians were fighting amongst themselves, Roman Catholics and Protestants. After 30 years, they were tired. Once you were king, all the people under you should be in that religion. If you're Roman Catholic, all the people should be Roman Catholic. If you're Protestant, now that war took 30 years. After that war, there was a treaty. It was called the Treaty of Westphalia, in which we got the nations that we have today started in that Treaty of Westphalia. When the people say we are tired of wars, let nations exist. Let's take our nations and have independence to do what they want. Because at that moment, they're mainly empires, very, very powerful empires. Spain was a big empire. The Dutch were under that empire for many years. After the Reformation, they start to realize God's idea is not empire, God's idea is nation. Why should we be ruled by the Spanish when we were Dutch people? So they fought for more than 75 years to be free. And at Leiden, as you know the story, there was a divine intervention and they defeated the Spanish and they became an independent nation. That nation, the Dutch nation, greatly affected your founding fathers because most of them were in the oppressed Europe. They would run to the Dutch and these teachings, majority of them came from them. Like John Locke ran to Amsterdam, got all the ideas that he had, wrote these ideas down there. It is those ideas that Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, those are the ideas they brought here. When they first came here, they started New Amsterdam, which later on was taken over by the British and became New York. So the impact of the teaching of the nations swept through Europe, overthrowing the idea of empire and bringing out the idea of nation. The nation is God's idea, and it was part of the revival that took place in the Reformation. The nations that embraced that teaching, like Germany, like the Scandinavia, like they started to prosper. They had been the small countries and the poor countries. The others which were strong, Spain was strong, Portugal was strong. These were the strong nations, but they did not embrace the Reformation, which Reformation had intended to overthrow the satanic and pagan ideas and promote the biblical ideas. Spain did not embrace that. Portugal did not. Italy did not. Those are the poor nations now. Yeah. The nations which were strong then, but did not embrace the progressive revelation that God was doing in their time of the Reformation, are now the poor nations. The weaker nations, like Germany, wasn't there. They were just territories. Spain was very, very strong. You know how powerful it was by the time it came here. They were very strong. Now they are the poor nations. Because when a nation rejects the truth, that's the trajectory. That's where it will end. That's why I'm saying that we must go back to the right theology to keep a great nation great. If we don't, we'll turn around and be like Spain. Nobody hears about Spain. Greece the other day was bankrupt. Yeah? Whoever hears about Portugal except in football or soccer? Do you ever hear about Portugal anywhere in the news except for soccer? This is what happens when a nation, when a church fails to disciple nations into the truth. However great that nation is, it is on a downward spiral. That's what is happening to Europe. These were nations which were nowhere. Now, they rose because they embraced the progressive revelation that God was giving the church. They embraced, for example, look at how they embraced the Reformation. Martin Luther taught about the person of faith as opposed to the church. You know, you couldn't go to God except through the priest. The priest had so much power. He was the one to forgive you. He's the one to declare you will go to heaven or not. Yeah. He could tell you, no, for you remain in purgatory for some time. All these things. Yeah. Martin Luther said, no. Your faith, person of faith. Yes. This was so powerful. He had to go against a huge system that had been on for 1,000 years. Without a gun, without a pistol, without an army. But peace, truth is like that. In a free and fair combat, truth will always win deception and lies. So you can see they taught the truth. He emphasized the universal priesthood of all believers, while Calvin emphasized the universal kingship of all believers. In Geneva. Geneva was a free city. German was under the control. He wasn't free because he wasn't free to teach about the universal kingship of all believers, because King Frederick was his benefactor, was the one protecting him from the church. So he did not emphasize the universal kingship of all believers, although he knew it. Because if he said it and Frederick gave him up, the church would have killed him. But Calvin, on the other hand, emphasized the universal kingship of all believers. And out of his teaching came the principles of governance that we enjoy today. For 1,000 years, the empire was the idea. Because when the Roman Empire fell in 476, the church came in and filled the vacuum, the cultural vacuum. It took the center stage. They had two doctrines which were false. The first one was that they call it the papal succession. How do they call it? Succession. Apostolic succession. That Peter was the first pope, and all the other popes have followed Peter, and so therefore the church owns that apostolic succession. That was the first one. The second one was called the donation of Constantine. So they taught that when Constantine was dying, he bequeathed the temporal power of leadership to the church. So in other words, the church equipped with these two. We have the apostolic succession, and then we have the donation of Constantine. When he was on his deathbed, he handed the temporal power to the church. So the church declared that we are the Holy Roman Empire. We are the Holy Roman Empire, meaning that the pagan Rome was defeated, but now we are the Holy Roman Empire. And they say this is Christ's kingdom, Christendom. They call it Christendom, Christ's kingdom on earth, led by the Pope, who is apostolically in succession from Peter. And now they formed another empire. They are now they're starting another empire. We remember the empire is a pagan what? Idea. So the church has now filled the vacuum and now has started another empire. So that empire now continues through those generations until the Reformation. So the Reformation was not just a religious thing. It dismantled, first of all, the false doctrines, but also it dismantled this political empire, because it took away the power of the Pope and put that authority in the Word of God. The Word of God was esteemed more than the papal authority, and so it did not only affect the church, it affected the politics. That's why the Roman Catholic Church came against the Reformation so strongly, because it was dismantling its power. When you have the power to decide who goes to heaven or not, you have power over men and all their faith. So they had so much power. One bishop of Milan one day said to the Emperor Theodosius, "You killed that soldier, you'll not go to heaven." "Oh, no, please." He said, "Okay, I'm giving you a punishment for 9 months. You'll walk in the pauper's garment for 9 months until I forgive you." And the emperor had to do that for 9 months. That's how powerful these bishops were. He said, after 9 months, he said, "Now I've forgiven you, can go to heaven." So the people had no access to the Word of God. They had no access they couldn't read the truth. So the church had so much power. Now, when the Reformation comes and releases the truth, when it puts the truth out, it sets Europe free. So the nations that embraced the Reformation, they said, we don't want emperors, we don't want kings, because kings are oppressive. So that's why Germany says we want chancellors. They have chancellors. In Britain, a revolution in 1649 took place, and Charles was autocratic. The parliament fought him under Oliver Cromwell. They said we needed to fight. These were Puritans. So they fought the king, arrested him, tried him. Majority of the people in England thought, how can you try the king? The king is the source of the law. He's the owner of the law. He's the owner of the country. There was a doctrine called the doctrine was the divine right of kings. Divine right of kings. That the kings have a divine right because they are chosen by God. Everything they do is of God. You cannot object. Just like the Roman Catholics teach the infallibility of the Pope. Yeah. The doctrine in Europe was like that. The divine right of kings taught that you cannot oppose the king. Yeah. You cannot dissent on his political decision. So now the church, the Puritan church, rises up to defeat that. And they fought, arrested the king, tried him, and found him guilty. And said, on such and such a day, he's going to be executed. Everybody turned up at the Whitehall to see how the king can be executed. The very representative of God, how can you execute him? So they came and they thought there would be an earthquake, the sun will go dark, there will be such a big, you cannot execute the king. Oliver Cromwell and his colleagues said, yes, we can. So they had this guillotine, a big axe come from up, and it brought on a platter, was pushed under the axe. It came from up, hit his neck, and the head fell many meters away. And the sun just continued as if nothing had happened. There was no earthquake, there was no darkness. And the people said, hey, so you mean kings are just like us? Now, that was the revolution that turns England round. They realized now these people, this doctrine is what? Is fake. The empire thing is fake. It's not true. This God, the divine right of kings is not there. Then they asked the church in Westminster, how does God want us to govern ourselves? So the theologians go into the word, they start to read the scriptures. They find in Matthew 20, Jesus saying, whoever shall be great among you will be a servant. If you want to go higher, to be number one, go lower, become a slave. Yes. So the way up is what? Down. So whoever should be number one in leadership should be a servant. In those days, they didn't use the word servant, they used the word minister. If you want to be great, you should be a minister. So they say that means the greatest leader should be the greatest minister, chief minister, prime minister. That's where that term comes from. Prime minister comes from the Bible, from the Christians interpreting the teaching of Christ about leadership, which they bring from the church into political leadership. And then in Europe, we start to have prime ministers. And then he does not rule with armies, he rules with a team, an army of servants, public servants, civil servants. Now that has been a concept that has been sold all over the world. So wherever England went, they had prime ministers. India, all our countries now picked that. But we picked the form without the substance. It was copy and paste. We didn't understand the concept of servants. So when our people become leaders, they think they are the rulers. They are not servants. In our countries, until we disciple them, they don't understand servanthood. They don't understand leadership as what? Servanthood. We have to disciple them. Now, that's why I'm saying the theology, therefore, a nation espouses is so important. If the church does not teach, explain these principles into the public arena, the country will continue to go down because what they will espouse will be the pagan ideas, which will lead in bondage at the end of the day. The freedom now you enjoy was because some Christians who believed in the Bible, in fact, they ran away from Europe because of persecution, came here to start biblical, to put in practice what the Bible says. And we, in Uganda, for example, have determined that we are going to go back to these biblical ideas, these truths. We start to teach them in a way that is not confrontational, in the way that is not offensive, so that we can objectively get people to think this is the right way. And incidentally, people are very, very accepting. They accepted them. Because there are many people who are not really good, objectively say, yes, I think this is a good idea. Oh, I think this is a good idea. And as long as they embrace the truth, they will be blessed. Yeah. God has done it this way. He has his moral law, but he has given the nations the right to make their own laws. He leaves the nations to make their own laws. To the degree they align with his moral law, to that degree a nation is blessed. If they choose not his way, they have a right to make their own civil laws. But they have also to live with the consequences of those decisions they have made. Nations have a right. That's how God has done it. Israel wants a king. God doesn't want a king. So he says to Samuel, leave them. That's what they have decided. They've rejected me. They have not rejected you. Give them what they want. So nations have a right to make their own decision. But they have also to live with the implications of what. So the further away your civil laws are from his moral law, the further away you are from his blessings. You can choose to make your own laws the way you want, but if you want his blessing, you'll have to be. That is the whole purpose of the 1400 years which he walked with Israel. Israel as a nation, he was showing them, this is what I want, but you have a choice to. Many times they didn't choose God, they chose otherwise, they did not enjoy the blessing. So why was it written for us in the Old Testament? So that he's asking us, according to the history, was I right when I told Israel to do this? Were they blessed when they did it? Did they suffer the consequences? So that we can now build our nations according to his firstborn. So that is the whole idea about nations, about how God's idea of nations is. Thank you very much. This time is finished.